Hello. Okay. I'm just gonna wait for a few more people to join, but essentially people are joining. Great. I've just been taking a look through my master's portfolio and I thought I would kind of share my sketchbook. It's obviously filled completely. Just to give you an insight into how I capture my processes and how I design, things like that. So if you do have any questions, feel free to ask them. There's a lot of content on my Instagram and also my YouTube documenting both my projects. So if that is something that you're interested in, then feel free to have a look through there. But I just wanted to kind of document my sketchbook a little as well through this live. So yeah, like I said, this is my master's sketchbook. I studied at the University of Greenwich and yeah, it spans over 2 years. So we can take a look. As you can see, it's getting really broken as sketchbooks do. But I actually do a lot of writing in my sketchbook. I know many people prefer to have notebooks and stuff, and I did take notes on Notion, for example, but most of the time many of my ideas were written down in here. So the first kind of few pages are essentially just understanding the brief, which in fourth year it was future ruins, so little mind map, and all of this is in the first couple of weeks, and I was kind of looking at archaeological ways of documenting stuff. So, small things, figuring out drawing notations and things like that, how I wanted to present drawings, lots of mind mapping, tutorial notes, and then sketches. I think this was this was based off of a book that I read by J.G. Ballard. And it was about this shopping centre, and I was kind of trying to capture what this shopping centre might look like through this sketch. I then kind of took a detour and made the mistake of doing a random massing exercise. So yeah, that was, not as successful, but it led me to then look at pandals, which are sort of temporary structures in India where people go to worship and celebrate, I guess. So I was kind of looking into that and trying to connect the two. This is just more notes, tutorial notes. Over here I'm trying to figure out different ways of representing the idea of a mall, and what I can name stuff. I really like naming things in my architecture projects. So I ended up doing a series of collages and naming each one of those. So this is me thumbnailing. I do a lot of thumbnailing for collages, but also portfolio pages, and I find it just helps me to associate different ideas with different pages rather than kind of doing things in a very linear way. More tutorial notes, mind maps, sketches. I think this was the idea that this shopping mall that I ended up building could sort of walk through or be a sort of procession through a high street. So I started looking into British high streets and how they're dying, and thinking about how to revive them or how to bring them back in a very sort of ceremonial way almost. More sketches. So this is where kind of we were just discussing the form of what the shopping centre might look like. Not your average shopping centre, obviously, but mapping that route through a high street that I had picked as my site. This was a very lovely sketch of, I think it was based on one of the collages I did, but in a lot more detail, obviously. It's supposed to be symmetrical, which is why this side is blank. But again, another good exercise. More sketches, more notes. I like this page because this is actually one of the advice my tutors gave me, and this kind of stuck with me throughout, where they were kind of like, don't take it too seriously, just have fun with your architecture project. And if you're in the thick of deadlines right now, I would still give you that advice, because you're supposed to be enjoying what you're doing, and whatever you're designing shouldn't really be an extra stress or anything. So just have fun with whatever you're doing and make sure that you enjoy what you're designing. I think this is where I started planning an interior collage. I was also 3D modeling at this point, so it was kind of like going back and forth between sketching and also SketchUp. We had a module called Future Representation, so it was like a render-based module, and you had to come up with 3 different renders. So this is me kind of like planning these 3. So this was like an interior sort of like perspective of a food court. I was going to do an augmented drawing, that didn't happen. I was also going to do a long elevation, which didn't happen, but I did do a sort of like outside perspective as a render. So it just goes to show that, not always things don't always go to plan, but that's okay. I think it worked out for the better anyway. Here's where I was figuring out the plan, and I was doing this through like layered sketching. So if you can see, I kind of I traced some of the elements that I had modeled in SketchUp and repeated them, and then traced over them again. I think the base was kind of like this sort of circulation space, whereas this top layer is like a metal frame or sort of like shell that houses one of the other areas in the shopping mall, where all the sort of like vintage artifacts are held. So that was that idea. I do really like the sketch, actually. I might scan it and post it. So yeah, this is more developing those renders and thinking about what I want the views to look like. So this is more accurate as to what I ended up making, which is a sort of like child's play shopping sort of like toy. So turning my architecture project, my building, into this sort of like toy configuration that it sort of like plays onto itself, I suppose. And then some prep for the cross-crit. So again, thumbnailing all of my pages really helps, and it lets me kind of like know what to expect or what I'm doing next, I guess. More sketches. But yeah, if you've got any questions in the meantime, like, feel free to ask them. This is again playing on the idea, this is a elevation, playing on the idea of like having shop shutters as a sort of like covering, or almost like a veil that goes around the shopping mall, so that at the end of each day it kind of like closes in on itself, just on a huge scale. This is feedback from the cross-crit. This is an interior render. So my cross-crit didn't actually go as planned. They didn't actually like the render that I did, and I think it was for the best. And they didn't say anything bad about it, but I knew it wasn't where I wanted it to be, so I took the time to kind of like sketch how I wanted it to look. And this was a lot better because it was based on the reference of like cathedrals, and a lot more detailed. This is feedback from the cross-crit. So they kind of said, put all the detail into the model. Your view looks too familiar and not strange enough. Replace all structure with your shopping instruments. So a big part of my project then became kind of using various elements that were related to shopping as the structural elements. So like recreating and reconfiguring shopping trolleys or baskets and things like that into structural elements. So again, this is more like render feedback, more notes. And then I think this is in lead up to a sort of like portfolio submission, which, yeah, like I said, thumbnailing always works. And also by this point, I had many of these pages ready to go. It was literally just about finishing off with like details or like different images or text or whatever it is, which is why I think, yeah, like that page isn't circled in, that page isn't circled in, but like the rest and majority circled in because I had finished them. More like little sketches to show that sort of like short section. And then this is where I got into like the plans, and then as you can see, portfolio pages over the Christmas break. So I kind of had a plan as to what I wanted to achieve over the Christmas break, because right after that we had our interim submission. This is sort of like a very poor exploded AXO. You've got the site, which is a high street. It's like on the corner of one of the high streets. This is your like steel structure, some of the spaces, etc, etc. This is a very early plan. So, you know, there's your kind of like beginning of an elevation at least. And I wish it had kind of like this sort of like cantilevered element, but it didn't. Just the way it worked out, I guess, but I do really like that. More plans. So this is actually a bubble diagram showing what area is what, and again I traced this off of, I think, this sketch, which is also really nice actually. But yeah, this was mainly traced off of SketchUp models that I had done. Literally just me taking the tracing paper over the screen. And then we started the design realization module, which is like your technical module. So I was doing a lot of research, tutorials, etc, etc. So I don't think there would be any sketches for a while actually. And this is me planning more of those pages and how they looked based on references that we had. I think that's cute and funky. Okay, this is going a bit more into depth into the components that I created. So like I said, like using the shopping objects to create those structural components. So like columns, you had these sort of like shutter arched walkways, taking that shopping trolley and kind of configuring it into something completely different. So part of that archway, I ended up then making like a really mega column almost that was very fantastical, had elements of like street lamps and things like that too. So that was a good kind of exercise in figuring out like the building blocks of this project. We had a pin-up, so more thumbnailing, some sketches for shutter options, structural engineer workshop, pretty straightforward stuff. This is the column I'm talking about that I ended up making. And then some post-its, design development, so more of just like figuring out how the columns and beams all come together and connect. And this is what I ended up modeling, which is kind of like a layer or a series of layers of shutters and beams, and obviously this sort of like central column, which became a big part of the project. This is a section sketch of one of the spaces in my model. It's kind of supposed to be a hall of forgotten artifacts, but it's kind of like suspended because the ground floor is an open sort of public space. So this actually, I can't really remember what this was based on, but I do like the symmetry and composition of this space. So you've got that like central column that I was talking about that I made, and I traced over it to figure out realistically where else I would need different supports and stuff. More thumbnail more thumbnails. Oh, thanks so much. Looking back on them now, I actually do like them, but in the moment, I really hated them just because I was like, I'm so bad at sketching, but I needed to like draw in order to like understand what I was doing too. More notes, and I think, technical stuff, some thumbnailing there. I think, at this point I was basically figuring out the shutter component and trying to break that down into various pages in my portfolio too. More pages. As you can tell, I love thumbnailing. It just makes things a lot easier to figure out, and then that way your portfolio is always up to date, so then you're not kind of like working till the last minute to put together pages and thinking of like how to do it. Oh, sorry, there's a comment about how these are coordinated with producing a final project. I think you're asking, how does all of this and all of the sketches kind of contribute to the final project, if I understand correctly? I mean, as you saw, like some of the sketches, like this stuff is literally just me figuring out things like connections, and even this you might think is not anything, but like for example, these bigger squares are the central columns, and the sort of like links in between is how I'm figuring out how that metal shutter enclosure is going to move around the site, because my site was literally a triangle, so it was really difficult to do in like 3D modeling. So I guess sketching helps you kind of like easily clarify those pain points in design. And in a similar sense, like this is how I was figuring out the way I wanted the structure to be configured, but also I had to think about how my spaces would fit in each of those areas too. So like I said, I had that sort of like central hall of forgotten artifacts. I also had the food court, and then I had some more like shopping spaces as well. So it was basically just a case of like trialing and testing and iterating, I suppose. I hope that answers your question. This is me figuring out details. What is a thumbnail? A thumbnail is literally just like your portfolio page, but as a sort of like storyboard. So each of these is like a portfolio page that I was planning. And obviously, as you can see, like it doesn't go into much detail, but for example, this one is like a structural grid diagram. So some of the stuff that I was figuring out earlier, I was just kind of like sketching out what that page would look like. So obviously I'd have a big diagram and then some like supporting elements, a bit of text at the top here. So things like that, basically. So this is me figuring out some details. And a lot of this project obviously was using bespoke structural elements that I had made. Yes, they kind of, were your typical columns and beams, but because they were so bespoke, I had to basically make up my own details as well. So yeah, and then more tutorial notes, plans, figuring out like each of the layers as well. And you can find all of that information online, so as long as it makes sense, then I think there's no kind of like right or wrong when it comes to a detail. This is me again, like doing a bit more planning as to what I have to do. So the design portfolio, over like a month, I think this was like the last month before deadlines. Week 1 was like working on the design portfolio, week 2 finishing off the 3D model, week 3 is plans and sections, elevations, AXO, and then week 4 is like final drawings. So yeah, breaking it down into like weeks and sort of like chapters also helps me a lot. And that's how you just stay on top of things and nothing falls through the cracks. So this is a few more pages, but I was like all over the place. So this is kind of like one chapter of my portfolio, I suppose, which is where you've got all the sort of GA drawings, elevations, and then renders and other sort of like bits and details and stuff. So the last few pages of my portfolio, essentially. And then I think that's all. Yeah, final drawings, again, thumbnailing how I wanted that exploded AXO to look. And then we come on to 5th year, so that's like literally half my sketchbook. But yeah, I think that's all I'll do for now, because I have to go. What software did you use? So I primarily used SketchUp, and I used V-Ray to render, and of course CAD for like plans and sections and stuff. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. Thanks for joining if you did, and thanks for staying. And if you do have any other questions or anything like that, feel free to DM me. Okay, bye.